Hello, hello. Can you listen
Hello.
to me?
Hello.
Okay. Thanks a lot for joining us today in this conference, this panel. My name is Jose Luis Aparicio. I'm a Cuban filmmaker and curator and critic. I'm the curator of Land Without Images, the absent in Cuban cinema, which is the Cuban cinema retrospective of alternative and independent Cuban cinema that we are showing here since last Friday in Documenta Halle as a part of INSTAR's activities in Documenta 15. I'm joined here today in person by Fernando Villaverde, a Cuban filmmaker, writer, journalist. He's one of the filmmakers that started working at ICAIC in the 1960s and made fiction films, documentary films, and later he went into exile and also continued his cinematic work in the experimental New York scene, and also in his literature. He has created novels, short story collections, and well, he's a great friend of mine. I'm very happy that he's here with us today. And also from Zoom, another great friend, Fausto Canel. He's joining us from Miami. He's also a Cuban filmmaker from the 19. He started in the 1960s in ICAIC. He created. He created fiction films, documentary films, and after he went into exile, he also worked in France, in United Kingdom, and continued his work also as a writer. The name of this panel is the title of this panel is Cuban Cinema in the 60s, the First Heretics, because we are going to talk with Fernando and Fausto about what it meant to do a different kind of cinema in the first years of the revolution. ICAIC was the first cultural institution founded by the revolution 3 months after the triumph in 1959. So that shows the importance that cinema had for the new regime as a propaganda tool, as a way of creating an imaginary of the revolution, of the epic of the revolution in the outside world. So in a totalitarian country like Cuba, all the images needed to be controlled, needed to be mediated by the government, and people like Fausto and Fernando created films that were censored, that were not screened in Cuban cinemas, that were shelved during the years, that some of them didn't have a premiere in the country, and they have been rediscovered in recent years thanks to a new generation of filmmakers that feels very close to this cinema, that it's a counter-canon cinema because it's a cinema that shows a different side of Cuba than the classic films of Gutierrez Alea, Santiago Alvarez, Humberto Solás, and other filmmakers, which are more on the official side of the cinema history in Cuba. And these are like heretics like Fernando and Fausto. Well, this is an introduction. Afterwards, we'll talk about some of their films, which are showing in the exhibition also. So I will give the word to them to start talking about those years and what it meant to be a heretic in the film community in Cuba in the 1960s, in the turmoil of the recent revolution. So, Fausto, can you hear me?
Sí, yo te oigo. Te oigo.
Um,
Te
I,
oigo.
I can hear Fausto here. Well, um, maybe I'll start with Fernando because I don't hear Fausto right now, but I think it can be resolved. Uh, with Fausto?
Hello.
Oh, okay. We are hearing you. So,
Okay, great.
yeah, like Fausto just, like, I'm going to be translating you. We're going to be translating you. So let us do pauses between your interventions for the translator to do her job.
Okay.
So I will start asking you, how did you how did you come to ICAIC? What was your interest in working there? And what kind of cinema did you wanted to make in those years? What was like the atmosphere of creation in the first years of ICAIC?
Bueno, yo creo que hay que empezar por decir de que había una gran costumbre en Cuba con los cineclubs, que había comenzado con el Cineclub de La Habana y el Cineclub de Valdés Rodríguez en la universidad, pero los cineclubs fueron el lugar donde se formaron los primeros cineastas. Y yo pertenecía a un cineclub, de hecho, creé un cineclub en el colegio donde yo trabajaba, donde yo estudiaba,
Um,
y dale,
I'm gonna translate now for you.
traduce.
Okay. Fausto, so he began with the cine clubs in Cuba. They were very, really relevant. There is a big echo. Thank you. Yes. Um, I'm gonna talk like Fausto, like for first person. Um, he was explaining, or I'm explaining that the cine clubs in Cuba are a very relevant role, and he started as in his first years creating since the school uh, clubs by himself. Dale.
Alfredo Guevara, que Fidel Castro nombró presidente del ICAI, al crear el ICAI, hizo un cóctel, una reunión con todos los que de alguna manera estábamos ligados al cine, tanto en los cineclubs como en la propia y poca industria que había antes de la revolución.
So Alfredo Guevara, he was the president of the CAI, which is an organization, the official film institute, and he made a big reunion with the most important persons in the film scene of that time. Yes, you can continue.
And he simply said, if you want to work at the CAI, come to see me. And I did. And that's how I came into ICAIC. And that's how Alberto Roldan came into ICAIC, because he was inviting everybody to come and present their own candidacy to become a member of ICAIC. And I came. And I started working in ICAIC in 1959, somewhere in June, practically a month after the ICAI was created. There was no production yet. I was just being a cargabate, which means I was helping everybody to do everything, but not really anything directly involved with film production, because it didn't exist yet. And there was another group of people that came from the cine clubs, but they were more tainted, if I am permitted that word, by their political uh, identification. Maybe Fernando can talk about this, because they were sent to the rebel army that created a kind of group of film production. And I think he was, Alfredo Guevara was willing to bring these people in, but they were too communist for the moment. So he didn't invite them yet. He will after the first 26th of July. Okay?
Yeah. It's very interesting because another thing we can say is that when ICAI was founded, all the cinema, all the filmmakers that worked in Cuba before the revolution were left out of the new film institute. Like
No.
filmmakers like Ramon Peon and others, they were not allowed to integrate this new film institute. So they needed everybody was new. they needed new people to do everything. There wasn't like an accumulated experience, I think. So all of you that were starting working, you were making your first films. You were not working in the industry before. So this kind of making it all new as an approach was very interesting because you didn't have the film school before, you didn't have the experience working in the industry, you were making new films from scratch, except maybe two or three that studied cinema in Italy, but all of you were working outside of the industry, like you were writing film criticism, doing and other things. I'm very interested what was the spirit of Ikai to these new filmmakers? What they said you could do, what they said you can accomplish. So they give you total freedom, or you felt that since the start you had limits for what you can do in a film.
Listen, we felt, or at least I felt, that ICAI was a propaganda uh, institute. It always was a propaganda institute. But the trick Alfredo Guevara developed was to make good films that were going to win prizes and steam in Europe in order for those critics and intellectuals in Europe to like and defend the Cuban cinema. But not because these films were that contestataire. At the contrary, the films were very tame. But I must add something. We were at the very beginning, and I would like to hear Fernando's opinion about this. I think we were very orthodox in the first months of or years of the kite. Okay.
Fernando, can you?
Yeah, of course. We were. That's one thing that I would like to explain later at large, at length. But the thing is that my attitude towards censorship is important because what at the beginning I didn't see as a complete censorship because I was more integrated with the revolution and I believed in the revolution and I backed it. So little by little, what I saw as limits to criticism, as something that had to be weighed, as something that could be discussed, little by little, I started seeing it as censorship that came from all sides. We were not permitted to say anything. The smallest things that didn't rhyme with which was the official thought came down. And that's my personal evolution got was important with that because at the beginning I had clashes with censorship, but I argued them, I discussed them, I accepted them in a little by little. But at the end, I saw that it was impossible, that anything was came clash into a wall.
Yeah, I think that in this case, you were really revolutionary. Yeah,
Yes.
you thought the revolution as an open space, a space of freedom, where you can really be revolutionary in your aesthetics, in your themes, in your narratives. And I think what happened to you is that you started discovering that the revolution was not that much revolutionary. Yeah,
Exactly.
they just created a new regime with as much limits as the one that was before and maybe more, and they didn't want you to be different, to be radical, to explore new territory. They just wanted you to repeat the same discourse, the same aesthetics.
Not even, you use the words radical, and that is radical to say that they didn't allow the slightest deviation from something that was very, very narrow. We didn't have to be radical to encounter censorship and to be completely turned out. The things that you wouldn't believe. For example, to go years later, the film that was shown here today, Elena. Elena was a fiction film that had to do, that was part of, let's say, it was part of a trilogy, a fiction film of 1.5 hours, and there were 3 filmmakers. Each of us had a half hour. My my story had to do with the couple. The man is. It happens in '57 at the Batista time, and the man is a refugee. He's asked for a political asylum in another country in Latin America, and he's leaving. And his friend, his pareja, is goes to say goodbye. The story is that how he can get to him and say goodbye at the airport and everything. And in the end, the goodbye is not that tragic because she, in a few hours, she's like playing around with another man. And that was the film. They couldn't allow that. They said, Alfredo Guevara said things like it wasn't perfect, said to another man that was another filmmaker of the trilogy, said, no, I cannot allow that because he's insulting our comrades from that fought Batista. And that could be part of the truth. But the real truth was that I was not making a revolutionary film, that I was not making a film about the fight, about the martyrs, about the real, that I was making a romantic comedy about an event that could be made anywhere, and that would be an innocent and simple film anywhere else in the world. But there, that couldn't be accepted. And it was that were the things that happened with censorship, that you encountered it when you didn't think you would.
That
Yeah,
film,
I would like to hear Fausto now talking about El Final, which is the other story in these 3 story collections that Fernando was talking about. He was talking about Elena, and El Final, which was another story from that film, was also censored. And I would like to hear Fausto's version on the censorship of El Final, the end.
okay. El Final was already a very difficult film to get through censorship because for the first time in Cuban cinema, we were talking openly about people leaving the country. No film before had touched that particular problem, which was a very, very serious, obviously, problem at the very beginning of the revolution until today. And and they were not very happy with the screenplay play because of this. But at the same time, Alfredo Guevara was playing with fire. He wanted to do things different, and he wanted the people in Europe, the critics in Europe, to love how daring were the film he was producing, etc. Because he wanted to get this kind of esteem and category for ICAIC as an institution. But at the same time, ICAIC, let's not forget, had been created as a medium of propaganda for the regime. So it was actually very difficult for Guevara to do both things at the same time, and he let us do the movie, shot in and edited the film. But when it came to give the approval, he said no because Fernando's film was, as you heard, very different, and I was not respecting and respetando the what you need to think of the martyrs of the revolution. I don't know, the other side was touching a very serious problem that was people leaving the country. And I had at the end of the movie, when she is crying and leaving her husband and obviously leaving not necessarily to the airport, but leaving, we hear Fidel Castro's speech nationalizing all foreign companies, especially American companies. And he didn't want it that, so he asked me to get this speech, Fidel's speech, out of the movie. And the movie ends with her crying and getting inside a tunnel in Havana under the bay, where the camera gets down and down and down and down and disappears in the darkness. But originally, and now the copy I have, being able to uh, do again, I have the speech again in the movie. So it was very difficult because he needed in front of the Europeans a cinema that dares to do things nobody is expecting him to accept. And on the other side, reality came and told him you cannot do it because that's where the old communist party get into the situation because the communist party is getting more and more power because Fidel Castro is moving towards the Soviet Union, and this old party, very old, very conventional, very petit bourgeois, is taking a lot of power, and they start criticizing Alfredo's work, not only the production of the movies, not only the movie he was producing, but also the movie he was buying in Europe to be projected in Cuba, to be shown in Cuba. Films like La Dolce Vita, for instance, films that the old communists thought were anathema. The Cuban people couldn't see that. Oh, how awful. And he was buying those movies because he wanted to give that image, create an image of the daring.
Well, I think we lost Fausto for a while. So, but I think it is very interesting when you think of Elena's censorship and El Final censorship because they were both censored but by different reasons. Because that let us think about the limits of censorship in Cuba. Because Elena was censored because uh, I think you didn't care that much about talking about the revolution and putting it at the center of your story. You were talking about a human story. You were telling the story of a girl who falls in love with a man and then with another man, and she gets asked in the movie if she's a revolutionary, and she doesn't answer. She's not sure. She doesn't care about it. She's just in her. She's just with her feelings and living her life. And the revolution is not at the center, so that was a problem. And in the case of Fausto, El Final, it was talking about people leaving the revolution, about a couple being torn apart because one wants to stay and one wants to leave. So if you talked about the complexities and the diverse problems of the revolution, you get censored. And if you choose not to talk about the revolution, you get censored too because you need to talk about the revolution. You cannot be indifferent to the revolution. You need to talk about it always and in the precise manner they want you to talk about it, not being very critical at all. So I think that gives us a sense of what were the limits of censorship in those years.
I can tell you even more. I can tell of something that happened, it's a story that's not known because it was a film that just was begun and died right at the beginning. But it shows the limits, the absolute limits they had. I wanted to make a film about the city of Trinidad, which is a city like a relic in Cuba of colonial art and architecture. And I told Alfredo I wanted to make that film, and he said, okay. And I started preparing the film. While I was preparing it, I saw that the Holy Week was approaching. And the Holy Week in Trinidad had been for decades or even more the most special place where Holy Week celebrations took place in Cuba. It was like Andalusia in Spain. So I saw that it was 1961, and I figured if I don't film that now, maybe that will never happen again. Maybe in 62 there won't be any Holy Week celebrations. So I asked Alfredo, listen, can I take a photographer, a sound man, lighting equipment, the minimum crew, a skeleton crew, go there, film that, keep it, and then later I'll make the whole script of the film and incorporate that into the film. He said, wonderful, go ahead. We went there, we shot that for a week, and since the beginning, the photographer and me were like paralyzed because the people there threw themselves into the floor in front of the images of the saints, were like begging. You saw that it was despair, that they were projecting a situation that had nothing to do with what had happened in previous years. And that it was that they people were reflecting all that they felt was falling upon them as Christian believers because of the revolution. So we filmed it. I don't know, we took several thousand feet of film. We took it to Havana, developed it, and saw it in the Moviola. And we saw that Jorge Herrera, the photographer, had captured all that chaos that was there. We canned it and we started doing the script. And a few days later, or a few weeks later, they tell me when I arrive in Tuicay that Alfredo, the previous night, had gone down into the cutting room where I had those cans with the editor, with the person that was going to be the editor of the film, and had seen this footage that we had filmed during the Holy Week. And I said, why? I don't know. They said he came down and he saw them. And later that day, his secretary calls me. He says, we want to tell you something. I go there to the office and she says, Alfredo says Trinidad is finished. There is not going to be any documentary of Trinidad. I say, why? No, there is no, I would like to talk to him. He doesn't want to talk about it. This is finished, forgotten. And that was it. So it's a good example about that the limits were everywhere and were harsh when they had to be harsh.
Yeah, I think every vision of the country that was not optimistic or epic vision, or was a vision that would like talk about the Cuban being happy, about doing the revolution, about all the social justice and all the changes that were supposedly taking place, it was an heretic vision. Because talking about your documentary, The Park, which is a very beautiful documentary on the daily life of Havana Central Park in Cuba, and all the old people that go there. Some people are homeless, some people are maybe like insane, or they are like they are not the people doing the revolution. They are the people left out of the revolution because they are not the young people. They are not the people at the center of the social changes. And this documentary that participated in the Leipzig Film Festival, a Soviet documentarian that was close to the Cuban Revolution, tried to take the picture out of the contest of the festival in Leipzig because it was too pessimistic, because it shows something of the revolution that was not the revolution. And I think that that's maybe because Trinidad, because it was a very despairing, desperate film, was also a film that they couldn't let people see, I think.
Yes, exactly. They didn't want the people to see that because that reflected a faith in a city, a Catholic faith that had been there like a traditional thing for centuries, and that instead of going away with the thinking of the revolution and whatever the revolution did, instead of going away, what happened was that the people there were in despair because they saw that all their beliefs and all their relationship with their church and everything was in danger. And Alfredo saw that the images showed it very clearly, and that was it. No film. He couldn't show that.
I want to ask Fausto now because he was talking about El Final's theme of emigration, exile, people leaving the country because they didn't find themselves in the revolution. And after that, Fausto did his feature film, Desarraigo. I don't know if rootlessness or uprooting is maybe the translation. And it was a film that won a very, talking about the idea that Alfredo Guevara and Ikai wanted these pictures to go to important festivals and win awards, but they were not screened in Cuba a lot of the times because they wanted to have these prestigious films abroad, but these films didn't get to the Cuban spectators. So maybe you can talk about Desarraigo winning in San Sebastian, and after that, screening very little in Cuba. And why do you think the ICAI didn't want the film to be screened that much in the country?
Well, we know now that film with three stories was forbidden for what, 50 years or something. And then I did Desarraigo. Desarraigo was also, for just the reason you're mentioning, a film Alfredo didn't release yet. He was waiting for a prize because that was his method. That was his attitude. Try to get the prize and then bring the prize to Cuba. Start talking about the prize the film had win in some festival, and then try show the movie, and that way kind of shut the mouth of the old communists that were trying to put him down, like as you know, the discussion, the long discussion he had with Blas Roca. And Desarraigo won a prize in San Sebastian, and that was the reason he showed the movie finally, practically a year after the film was finished. And it was 1 week in La Rampa, which is a very important film in Havana, but only 1 week. And that's the kind of experience most of us have when we made a movie with conflictivo, as we said at the moment.
And well, and sometimes you had the luck between the luck of finishing the film, because sometimes the films didn't get finished at all. Sometimes the films were cut off in the writing process, in the writing phase, or sometimes even in the editing room, the films were not allowed to be finished. So I want Fernando, if you want to talk about your experience with your first feature, El Mar, the sea.
Well, one thing I would like to point out first that with this thing about desarraigo, which is the two sets of norms that every dictatorship has for inside and outside. For example, the park in Cuba was not censored, it was shown, but it was shown like underneath. It was paired with the worst films they could find so that no one would go see it, because no one would go see the film that it was going in the screens with it. And it was no, they didn't like the park very much. But then when I leave Cuba,
Yeah, to explain a little, because it was a short film, and they showed the film with a feature, and they paired the film with the most unpopular features they could find, so not a lot of people would go to see them.
Yeah, exactly. When they had a film that they wanted people to see, they put it with films from France, from Italy, that people from wanted to go see, but they didn't want to see. They didn't want people to see this documentary. They showed it with a Bulgarian film or something like that, that they knew it was going to disappear from the screens soon. But then, as I was telling you, I leave Cuba, and then shortly after I leave, it was weeks, I was in Paris, and I meet a Colombian who was a film student, and he says, "Oh, I know you." So why? Because I saw your film, The Park. I say, "How did you see it?" He said, "Well, because the Cuban embassy in Paris had a showing of films from this documentaries from Cuba. They had 4 or 5 documentaries, and they showed yours, so that when they wanted to make propaganda about how were the Cuban films and the good films they were making and everything, they showed that film, but inside Cuba, they didn't want it to be shown." And then going back to El Mar that you asked me about, El Mar was a film. What happened with El Mar was the same with Elena, that I always say these people didn't know how to read scripts, because the final product of Elena was almost word by word the script that I had written with my wife and had been approved. And when they see it finished, they don't like it. What did they read when they read it? Because the film was the same. With El Mar, it happened. El Mar had a few changes, but not many. But it was the same thing. They approved it. We filmed it. They spent 100,000 pesos, which was a lot of money for them at the time. And when the film is finished, they said, "No, we don't want that film." But why? It was the film that you approved. What happened? They saw when it shows that they didn't know how to read a script. They had to see the finished film to see what film they had approved. They didn't know anything about else. And so what happened was that the film had been finished. The film had been edited, dubbed, recorded, the music, everything was finished. The only thing that had to be done was to make a copy. But then when the films were at that point of being ready to make a copy, then Julio Garcia Espinosa, which was the second in command at CAIC, or Alfredo, had to see it, to see if they give it final approval. When they see El Mar, they say, no, this cannot go. And absolutely not, and absolutely not. It was discussion after discussion. And in the end, they said, if you want the film to come out, Julio is going to re-edit it. And then I said, well, let's go. Let's see if we can save something. What Julio did was a disaster, a complete disaster. He took out whole scenes of the film, a film that was about nearly 2 hours long. It had 78 minutes left or so. It was horrible. And then they said, well, let's see the film. They saw the film after Julio had edited it. And again, Guevara said, no, I don't like that film. Even with his second in command montage. And then I said, well, why don't you let other directors see it, see if they like it, to see what they think of it. Maybe I can hear their advice. And they said, okay, let's organize a projection. He organized the projection with, and there were many of them, photographers, directors, editors. They saw it, and it was about 80% backing of the film, some saying it's beautiful, it's great, it has to come out. And I said, no, I shouldn't. I wouldn't like it to come out because it's not the film I did. It's a horrible version of the film. But even so, they said it was magnificent. And the day after, I went to Alfredo and I said, look, they say it's great. Okay, but it doesn't come out. And that was it.
And this film is has not been recovered. So this not even the second montage is found today in the archives. So it's a lost film so far. Maybe we get lucky someday and find some of the images of the film. But that happens a lot too. Films that were like in the finishing stages, they are not available anymore. And some of these shorts that we've been talking about, like The Park, Elena, El Final, we can see them today by miracle because you left the country, and after you left the country, Fausto left the country. You were not allowed to take a copy of your film with you. Fausto has a story with that because in the France embassy, the Cuban embassy in France, they had a copy of some of his films, and they didn't allow Fausto to use those copies to find jobs, to find work in France. I don't know if Fausto is still with us. He has trouble with the connection, but they hijacked your work. They didn't let you to take it with you, and for example, The Park and Elena, Fernando and Miñuca were not allowed to see it in 60 years. After they left Cuba, they just lost track of the film, and now they have been able to watch it again because the government and the Official Film Institute has total control over the archive, so the authors don't have any saying in that also. And I was thinking about something that you said about they don't know how to read scripts, and I think that's very interesting because I think some of the most transgressive elements in these films is not um, directly connected to the narrative. Sometimes it's in the tonal element. It's the atmosphere of these films. What feels transgressive is what you feel when you watch the film, not what the story the film is telling. Because I feel that with Elena and the Park, and also El Final, it's the sense you get of hopelessness, of despair, of pessimism, of sadness, and you need to see the final film in order to get to know that. So they were not very good reading scripts, but the transgressive element was there at the end. No, the feeling that you get that these people are saying that Cuba is not that paradise, it's not that utopia. We say it is. So we cannot let this film be shown because
Yeah, that's why I said that they didn't know how to read a script, because when you read a script, you not only read the words, you have to imagine a film. That's a person who knows how to read a script, and they didn't know. They just read words, and for example, in Elena, it's obvious that they read a melodrama where there was a romantic comedy. They were completely off the mark.
yeah, I think that has to do with the limits of the imaginary they set in Ikaik, because all Cuban films have like kinds of films that can be made. They are always social melodramas or social films, social dramas, or comedies of manners, like light comedies about the supposedly Cuban way of being, a character, like this cliched representation of the Cuban. But more complex films in the spectrum between a social melodrama and a comedy of manners were not allowed. So they didn't expect you to make a romantic comedy because you don't. How are you making a romantic comedy in the midst of a big revolution, a big
No, and
epic
even a
revolution?
romantic comedy that has as a central theme a person who is going away from the country because he has become he's an asylum in a foreign embassy. He has fought the Batista regime. How can I make a comedy out of that? That's impossible.
Yeah, and I don't know. Fausto is with us. Are you listening? I think he has problems with the connection, but we'll still keep talking with Fernando here.
Okay.
Yeah, and I wanted you to know because this process of being with the revolution and trying to make a revolutionary cinema for the revolution, because you had the sense that these people were expecting this kind of films for you, and discovering that you were not allowed to do that, they didn't want you to do anything different. Talk about the time when you decide that there is nothing else you can do in Cuba. There is nothing else you can do in Ikai. How's the process of knowing that and saying I prefer going into exile to stay here and maybe start making another kind of film that I know it will not be censored. Like many filmmakers of your generation, because some left but some stayed, and stayed in Ikai for 30 years making films. So talk about that. How your generation splits. One, some of them left and some of them stayed. No.
Well,
And do you think that the people that stay in Cuba were allowed to do the films they wanted to? That is a speculation, but do you think they had the freedom to do it?
well, for me, it's a difficult question because I really have to confess I have followed very, very little the films that have been done in Cuba because I had such mistrust of what was being done there that I just saw one film here, one film there. So I don't know the film history of the people I left there. But for the very few I knew, and I knew well, it seems to me that they had to conform to what they were asked to, or that they were always like splitting hairs, doing this, doing that. Humberto Solas, he wanted to do films, but I don't know up to what point he was happy with what he did. I think to myself, when I remember knowing him, that he cannot have been free in saying, I want to do this. He had to be always thinking, this has to be done, but this cannot be done. This can be done, this cannot be done. And you have to work like that. That was, for me, that is an impossibility. Because one thing, I think that the first important thing that happened to me after I left Cuba was I started to think on things I wanted to do in any way. Theater, not film, because I didn't dream of making films, writing, and anything. And how little by little I started discovering, to my surprise, to my amazement, and to my complete happiness, that I was losing that weight of having an idea and testing it with something. No, I have an idea and I go ahead with it. And I go ahead with it. And it took some time to lose that weight that the revolution had imposed on me and my ideas. That when I had an idea, it couldn't go ahead spontaneously. It had to be, can it work? What does it mean? What does it carry? What weight does it carry? No, I had an idea and take it to its limits. It's your idea, it's your freedom. Go ahead. And that was very hard at the beginning, but eventually, I think in a short while of freedom, in about a year or 2 years, I had gotten rid of that terrible thing of having always, and I think the people that stayed there, I find it very difficult from what I have seen of them, from the little I have seen of them, from what I've known of they have done, that they have worked with freedom. I think they always had that thing upon them that is this going to be accepted? Is it not? Is this going to work? Is it not? Is this going to be censored? Is it not? And working like that, it's impossible to make fresh and real weighty things with that weight upon you.
Yeah, it's the theme of the self-censorship in Cuba, because you don't always need a police or a censor over you, because you become your own censor and your own police, because you know that there are very set boundaries, very set limits, and you kind of get self-censored by yourself all the time. So that's a terrible thing, and that is a thing you get rid of when you go into exile. Um, I think Fausto didn't come back at all.
No.
So, so I wanted to know, looking back at these films and knowing that a connection was destroyed between the films you did and the films that other censor filmmakers of your generation did. The connection between those films and the generations that came after were like totally destroyed, because those films were not screened, were not anywhere to be found. So the filmmakers of the 70s, the 80s, the 90s never saw them. They never get to be influenced by them. There was like a breach on the tradition. they only watch the classic films, the films that were allowed to be screened. So what do you think about contemporary Cuban cinema that you have seen more? I think that the films of the people of your generation that they continue making. And do you think that now people discovering your work, Fausto's work, Nicolás Guillen Landrian's work, Miñuca's work, Roldan's work, all these filmmakers that have been rediscovered by the new generation of filmmakers right now, do you think there is a connection? Do you think that they are like taking all you started and taking that into new directions, into new?
Well, I think the big connection that I see is the ability to work in freedom. I was completely surprised 3, 4 years ago when I began discovering the films, the documentaries, the fiction films, short, long, that were being done by independent filmmakers in Cuba, because to my mind, I couldn't find it possible that people in Cuba could do these films, because I didn't think it was, first, I didn't think it was possible because of a police state, but then taking that aside, how was it possible that these people are doing these films so strong, so interesting, so powerful, like that? It's like an explosion that came out, and I still believe it's an explosion. I think that there is no connection between what we did aesthetically and what you are doing. The connection is that we were thinking by ourselves what we wanted to do, and for the first time, with 2 generations in between, now your generation has come up with the same thing, like if it was starting anew in a different place, in a different country. Let's do what we want. And I see one film, and I see another, and I see another, and I'm surprised. There is one person, 2 persons, 3 persons, and they are all, there is a whole group of people acting with that freedom and creating with that freedom. For me, it has been a surprise, and I'm still learning and seeing new films that keep on telling me how the contemporary reality of Cuba is being shown in such a special way, because, as I tell you, it's a very special way, it's a very peculiar way, and I don't think it has to do with the things we thought, or with the cinema we were trying to make, the ones that we were there at the time in the 60s or 70s. It's absolutely yours. It's a new thing that has popped up there like by miracle.
Yeah, you see there is a connection in spirit, right? Like in the free
Exactly.
spirit of making films, and maybe starting from the scratch, because like it is the birth of independent cinema. Like you were like creating Cuban cinema like for the first time too, with resources that were new to you, as these resources are new to us. And I want to, on that, following that, I want to ask you if you think, what do you think about the legacy of the ICAIC of the 60s? And that includes the films that that like the government approved and the ones that don't. Do you think there is a legacy there? What can be learned of those conflicts, of those confrontations between different ways of understanding cinema? And you were saying there is not a connection aesthetically between the films you did and the ones we make right now, but what do you think of the legacy of the CAIC as an institution, and the films that are recognized all over the world, like this new Cuban cinema of the 60s? Do you think they still have things to tell us? Do you think there is a connection with the young filmmakers, maybe like an anxiety of influence for the young filmmakers? I want to know your opinions about that.
Well, I really cannot tell how much the young filmmakers were influenced by what was done in Cuba. I don't know. I cannot know what you were discussing, how you were thinking, how you used that for your own purposes, because what you used was very different from what you do. It has been transformed. And telling that, I tell you that I also told you that I saw very few films from the CAIC after I left Cuba, because I didn't trust. I didn't think I was going to see a good film. I'd rather go see a film, use my time to see other films. So, but in in general terms, it's an opinion that is maybe not too valid, but I don't think there is a big legacy by Kai. I think it is maybe one film here, one film there, and that many films were overblown by visitors, leftist visitors that went there, by critics that were trying to support the Cuban Revolution, but that in truth, there is not much left, just and that there as a whole, of course not. If anything, there is one film here from one filmmaker, another film here for another filmmaker, and that would be it. That is my opinion. In this case, from a long distance.
And I'm curious. We are, I don't know the time, but I think we are approaching the end. But I'm curious in the way that you reinvented yourself as a filmmaker when going into exile. The films you made afterwards in New York, as a part of the New York experimental scene, that were exploring new territories. When you think about the films you made in Cuba, so I want to know about the process of reinventing, like mutating into a different kind of filmmaker, also very experimental, also very interested in not doing like the film that could be expected from you, making like films with a lot of freedom, but different kinds of films that Elena and El Parque. You think about Apollo, Man to the Moon, or Ladies Home Journal, these kind of films that you made in New York.
Well, what happened was this. When I tell you, when I leave Cuba, I'm almost certain that I'm not going to be making films again, for many reasons. Not only because in Cuba I had the resources and I don't think I'm going to get them easily elsewhere, but because of my own way of thinking the cinema. I like doing films in Cuba because I had a very small crew, because I worked in small stories. I didn't like commercial film was not something I liked. I didn't think of going to anywhere, and I'm not thinking about making blockbusters. I'm thinking about going to France or Germany or whatever, or Spain, and doing a small film. And even so, I knew it was a commercial adventure that didn't appeal to me too much. I like doing things there. It's a contradiction, it's a paradox, because it was the revolution and because it was not a commercial cinema. That's why I like making cinema there. So when I leave, I forget about cinema. I forget about the films I did there. I really closed the door on them. I closed the door on Cuba, on socialism, on everything, and I closed the door on my films. I forgot about it. When I do the films in New York, I don't relate them to what I have done before. When I do the films in New York, I go to New York with my wife. We go there. We liked films. We had seen films nonstop after leaving Cuba. We had spoken about film nonstop after leaving Cuba, but not thinking of making anything, because we love cinema. And then in New York, we start going to the underground cinema scene. We start going to the filmmakers, Cinematheque. We start going to A1, the film forum. And then we see something that for us is completely new. We hadn't seen that before. It touched us immediately. Why? Precisely because we had never been interested in commercial cinema. And that was great. Here is something that we can do. We can do cinema again. This is what we can do. And we saw those films, and it was like if we had never done anything before. The way we worked that was like if Elena and that was gone. This is a new thing that we are learning, a new way of making film, and we are going to do films this way. And that's why we started making them, and that's why we did them, and that's how they look so different, because they are really different. We found a new way of approaching the cinema, and we used it immediately. We bought a little camera and we started filming in the streets and doing whatever we wanted and doing it at home. doing a film at home with $100 costed $100 to make a film.
I think that's very beautiful because not a lot of artists have this ability to reinvent themselves so many times and to do such different things that feel connected to the same core, to the same idea of cinema as an act of freedom, as a free expression, very outside of the commercial cinema, outside of propaganda cinema, as the one you were expected to make in Ikaik. So, well, as a personal opinion, when I found out about all these Cuban filmmakers like Fernando Villaverde and Miñuca, his wife, and Fausto Canel and Nicolás Guillen, and all of those filmmakers of the 60s that were doing different things. For many years, they didn't want young people, young filmmakers, young Cubans in general to watch these films. And I felt very connected to them. I felt that was a very important part of the tradition because I never felt connected to the classic canonical filmmakers. So I think this is my family inside Cuban cinema. This is my genealogy tree. I have a connection with them. I do different things, but I think that this idea of making films very freely, not thinking about the expectations institutions or the government has about my films, but making my films as the films I want to watch and the films I feel I need to do. I felt that all this is a real tradition for me, like the counter canon, the counter tradition, the counter archive of Cuban cinema, and this is a whole other side of the country that needs to be portrayed in films, and that was already portrayed in those years. And I think the way these films have come to light so many years after, and we are seeing the films, and we're screening the films here, and we are writing about them, commenting about them, talking about them to friends, to other friends filmmakers, and to friends in general. I think that's a way to overcoming censorship. It's kind of a revenge, like a symbolical revenge to all these people that didn't want these films to to see the light of day. So I thank you all here for joining us today. I thank you, Fernando and Fausto and Miñuca that is here with us also, and she will be talking tomorrow about her work and all the other filmmakers.
You say of her work, but I have spoken today of myself.
And her work too.
Most of what I've said is related to her.
Yeah.
Because the films we made in Cuba, the script was Elena and El Mar. The script was by both of us. Then the films we made in New York, some were made by both of us. We were always doing the films together.
Yeah.
We were always working together in some
Yeah,
way or
you
another.
cannot separate the work of one from the other. It's like a whole system all the time. And yeah, I think that, as I was saying, we need to watch these films. We need to understand there is a different Cuban cinema. And I don't know you want to say some words before the end.
I have spoken enough, I think.
Yeah. Okay. And I thank Fausto that was with us, and then maybe he wasn't able to enter again. But well, thank you all for listening to our talk, and please watch these films and watch films that are not the same films that are talked about all the time, because they do not represent Cuba, or they just represent a very small portion of Cuba. And Cuba is more things. It's much bigger, more complex, and films like this that we're talking about represent all this diversity. So thank you.
Bueno,
Bien,
yo
¿te
creo.
gustó? ¿Te pareció bien?
Sí, yo